The podcasting technology of NORML is made possible by Red Aphid Interactive Media. More information at redaphid.com. And distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. This is your daily audio stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular audio podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about the show at our website, NORMLAudiostash.com. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. Welcome back to the Audio Stash today, Tuesday, April 23rd. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Take a moment to join us at NORML to end marijuana prohibition in America. We can do it together. Just visit NORML.org. We have a great show for you here today, folks. We'll speak with Bernie Ellis of Tennessee. There's a benefit in Nashville, Tennessee tomorrow night to help Bernie save his farm. More information about that case at SaveBernie'sFarm.com, and we'll hear that interview here today. Tomorrow's Audio Stash, Wednesday's Audio Stash, is going to be a big show all about vaporization. We'll hear from California NORML's director Dale Geringer and Dr. Mitch Earlywine about new research being conducted about vaporizers and why they are so safe and effective. Also on Thursday on the Audio Stash, we'll hear from revolutionary poet and author John Sinclair. And Friday's Audio Stash, we got a music special for you Friday. Fishbone has a brand new album out called Still Stuck in Your Throat. We got a chance to catch up with those guys this week, and we'll play some tracks from that new album on Friday's Audio Stash. But first up here on the Audio Stash today, each Tuesday, we take time here on the Stash to highlight some of the dozens of marijuana-related pieces of legislation moving through the country's state houses right now in this legislative season. It's our regular segment, Government at Work. If you want to get involved with legislation, make sure you send letters to your legislators. Make sure you get involved with passing marijuana reform legislation across the country this year. We have links to get involved in the Take Action Center at NORML.org. And we have links to it on our website today. Send those letters to your representatives. Give them a call. Send emails. Make sure you get your voice heard because, folks, it is the easiest and most effective way that we can end marijuana prohibition right now is to participate in legislation that's already pending out there. Let's hear about what's going on this week in Government at Work. This week in Government at Work, we're taking a look at medical marijuana in Maine. The Pine Tree State has had a medical marijuana law on the books for almost a decade. But new legislation was being heard by committee this week that would turn what is a cursory medical marijuana program into a readily accessible service for residents who qualify as patients. Paul Armentano, NORML's senior policy analyst, offered written testimony to the hearing this week, and joining us today to discuss the legislation is the executive director of the Maine Marijuana Policy Initiative, Jonathan Levitt. Jonathan, welcome to the program today.
Thanks. I appreciate having the chance to come and talk.
It's great to speak with you. If you would, give us a brief rundown of this Maine legislation, LD 1418.
I guess a quick summary of the points that what this legislation would do is number one, it would increase the usable amount of marijuana for medical use up to 12 plants and exempt seeds, stems, and roots from weight limitations. Second one, it would allow people who are allowed to prescribe medicine beyond just a physician, the physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, they'd be allowed to recommend marijuana for medicinal purposes. It would prohibit law enforcement officers from cooperating with federal authorities in terms of investigating, searching, and arresting patients eligible to receive marijuana. And I think most importantly, it would facilitate the creation of dispensaries where patients could access their medicine.
And how has the existing medical marijuana law been put into practice there?
It isn't. That's the big story up here. Is the law has been on the book now for close to 8 years, and it just simply doesn't work. And that's according to both patients and providers. There's no access. The limitations on amounts are just not feasible. Doctors who generally tend to be pretty conservative will generally not write scripts. It's a real search to find people who are willing to go on record, as I should say, with recommended, obviously, since that's the only thing they're allowed to do. They're still scared. They don't feel the protections are there, and they don't feel that they're going to be safe if they actually give that kind of advice to people. So it's not working right now, and this law would change that and make it much more workable.
And what kind of dispensaries would be envisioned there to be put into place in Maine?
Well, it's essentially they would be nonprofit dispensaries that would come into place, and they would be operated under the oversight of the Department of Health and Human Services. And so there would be regulations, and there would be community control over questions of siting and things like that. But it would be a place where patients could come to access their medicine, and a lot of the nitty-gritty details of that would be worked out, in conjunction with the Department of Health and Human Services.
And Jonathan, having caregivers other than MD doctors able to make these recommendations, is that because of the rural nature of most of the state of Maine?
Yeah, I mean that's the reality. That's the first line of providers for a lot of people are not doctors. They're nurse practitioners or physician's assistants, and this would make it something that would be close at hand, as opposed to quite a reach for most people to go and find a medical establishment that actually entails doctors in some parts of Maine. Yeah.
Now, I know you've seen sort of the standard opposition from the state police and the like, but there is a significant amount of support from elected officials on this, isn't there?
There is. Actually, Maine has a pretty significant history. The chair of the committee we were in front of yesterday actually introduced medical marijuana legislation back in 1980. So we've got some significant support. It's Maine's, on any level, people are familiar with Maine. They know that marijuana is the number one cash crop in the state. A good part of the economics of Maine are dependent upon this. You walk into a room at a town meeting, and a good portion of the people there have experience with marijuana in any number of levels. So this is not a question that people in Maine are unfamiliar with. It's not an issue that legislators themselves are unfamiliar with. There's been a steady stream of medical marijuana legislation introduced over the last 10 years as well that have incrementally made some improvements in the situation, or at least reintroduced the idea on to some of the more contentious points. So we know we've got some significant legislative support. Certainly off the record, it's a no-brainer. It's just a matter of us being able to show that elected officials aren't going to suffer when they come and support something that is so apparent to so many people in the state.
And Jonathan, it's a very specific set of medical conditions that allow residents to qualify for the program in Maine. Is that right?
Yeah, right now it is, and in this legislation there would be some very specific ones that would be added on, like Crohn's, but there would also be the opportunity for the Department of Health and Human Services to continue to identify other potential illnesses that need to be addressed in this way. So it does allow that to be an open-ended question with people who are more familiar with this issue, and I think that the Department of Health and Human Services is the place to go in terms of them understanding that certainly should be on top of what people in Maine need in terms of healthcare issues. So we do think it's a good way to move forward. I think open the door for a continued discussion on this as new evidence presents itself that patients are utilizing this as a medicine and it's working. Then the Health and Human Services are given the opportunity to continue to add on illnesses when necessary.
Jonathan Levitt is the Executive Director of the Maine Marijuana Policy Initiative. They can be found online at mainecommonsense.org. Jonathan, thanks again for taking time to speak with us today.
All right, no problem.
Thank you again. We have links to the Maine Marijuana Policy Initiative website on our homepage today at normalaudiostash.com. And make sure to tune in every Tuesday to take a look at marijuana legislation making its way through state houses across the country in our weekly Government at Work. And make sure you get involved too. Visit the Take Action Center of the NORML.org website. We have links to that at normalaudiostash.com today as well. Send those emails, send those letters, make those phone calls, and interact with our elected officials to end marijuana prohibition right now.
You're listening to NORML's Daily Audio Stash.
America's war on peaceful citizens who enjoy marijuana deals out harsh realities every day, from prison, loss of financial aid, even loss of children. But one of the most common and heartbreaking tactics used by prosecutors around the country against marijuana consumers and marijuana cultivators in particular is property forfeiture. Today we'll speak with Bernie Ellis of Tennessee. Bernie is facing a civil action to try and seize his Tennessee farm. Listeners can see photos of the farm and read more about Bernie at SaveBerniesFarm.com. Tomorrow, on April 25th, there will be a benefit concert and event in Nashville, Tennessee to raise the money necessary to allow Bernie to keep his home of over 40 years. We caught up with him this week to talk about the case. Bernie, welcome to the Audio Stash today.
Chris, thank you kindly. I really appreciate this opportunity.
It's wonderful to speak with you today, Bernie, here on the heels of this benefit in Nashville tomorrow. Now, Bernie, let's talk about these legal cases you've been dealing with. Tell us how all of this began.
Well, my own involvement in producing medical marijuana stretches back almost 2 decades, from when I helped set up and administer the Tennessee AIDS program in the late 80s. I began to come in contact with people who would benefit from using cannabis, and so I began providing small amounts to a handful of patients each year, and it expanded from working primarily with HIV/AIDS patients to primarily with cancer patients over the years. And in August of 2002, I was providing to 4 people with the possibility of a 5th person I'd helped in the past, sort of in the wings, and 3 of those were cancer patients and then an organ transplant patient, and the 5th person was an HIV/AIDS patient. And while, of course, the federal government is not required to tell you why they show up on your property, a few days before their raid, a local drug dealer had tried to buy cannabis from me, and I had refused. And so the sense in my community is that it's likely that he turned me in to the Tennessee Marijuana Eradication Task Force. The task force showed up on 8th and basically stayed on the farm for about 8 hours. I freely admitted what I was doing, gave them permission to search, and they did confiscate a number of plants and other things from my house, notably my personal computers. And at the end, though, of the day, to my surprise, they decided not to arrest me and indicated that because I'd cooperated with them and because they had spoken to a number of local officials, all of whom had vouched for me personally, they decided not to arrest me.
And at the time of the raid, you were also a medical marijuana patient as well, is that right?
Correct. I have used ever since probably, again, the late 80s. I've found a great deal of relief smoking generally no more than about 1 joint a day for both my fibromyalgia and degenerative joint disease in my hips and my spine. Found a great deal of relief from the pain and inflammation of the degenerative joint disease. And as far as the fibromyalgia goes, I found using cannabis daily really helped me sleep. And for those of us who have this particular condition, getting a consistent number of hours of deep sleep is really critical to controlling the symptoms associated with that disease. So, again, I'd found a great deal of relief myself and really operated on the perspective, or from the perspective, that because I was benefiting from it and growing for my own use, that it was incumbent upon me to help anyone else I could with whatever I had left over from what I needed. So, and that perspective, I guess, or that way of operating held true for 17 years until the raid.
Now, Bernie, your case really took some intense twists and turns to get to the point where it is today. And you first weren't arrested, but this property forfeiture action, this was filed months after the raid itself.
Well, you're right. I wasn't arrested, but I was informed that evening that they would be proceeding. Since the task force is both a joint state and federal task force, the task force really had the option of pursuing my case at either the state or federal level. And for about 3 months after the raid, I was really not privy to what was going on, but the first attorney I hired indicated that from his perspective, had the case stayed at the state level, it was very possible that I might have escaped either without being indicted by the grand jury because of my local reputation, or at worst facing about a 2-year probation sentence and an $8,000 fine. But at the end of 3 months, I was informed that the feds had decided to take the case and were going to be pursuing prosecution. So at that point, I hired a second attorney who is much more familiar with and operates at the federal level. And within a few months, came to the decision that he was really providing me the best representation. So I terminated the initial attorney and worked exclusively with my second attorney, who is Peter Stryance, who practices in Nashville. And we went through, as I remember, probably 2 years of negotiations with the federal government. And you're really sort of hamstrung if you decide to work towards a plea agreement. You really lose a great deal of any leverage you might have as a defendant. For instance, we were never allowed to independently assess, weigh, and count the plants, weigh the plant material and count the plants. Even though the feds themselves, as they reported to us, kept dropping the number of plants they said they had in their possession, they kept increasing the amount of money that they wanted me to come up with in lieu of an effort to confiscate my farm. So, and probably the biggest twist, which frustrated both my attorney and me mightily, for that 2-year period, the federal prosecutor had indicated to us that they would negotiate my penalty based on the weight of the evidence rather than the plant count. And again, we felt fortunate about that because while I only had 20 to 25 plants of any significant size, I did have a number of smaller plants that put me over the 100 plant limit, which is really sort of the critical limit for the feds. And so, again, we felt fortunate that we were negotiating based on the weight of the evidence. When we got the feds to reweigh the evidence towards the end of the process, the actual amount of weight that they said they had, and again, by weight, this is the entire plant, including the root ball with dirt still on the roots. So when they're weighing plant material, they're weighing a great deal of stuff that's not usable by patients. But anyway, their estimated weight dropped by more than 2/3, and again put us in a range that might have made me eligible immediately for probation. And on the day we went to sign our plea agreement, we discovered for the first time that they were charging me not based on the weight of the evidence, but based on the plant count. And that charge, the single charge of manufacturing 100 or more plants, carried with it a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence. So my attorney put a halt to the process, but at the same time, again, we were left in the plea negotiation process, left with either accepting what the feds were offering or going to trial. And if you do cooperate, you are eligible for what's called the safety valve, for allowing the judge to depart from the mandatory minimums as long as you do cooperate, have otherwise a clean record, and have no other extenuating circumstances that would make you ineligible for the safety valve. So anyway, even after 2 months, we did decide that it still behooved me to maintain the safety valve provisions. However, the feds were demanding that I come up with $200,000 to keep the farm for an amount of usable cannabis that by that point had been estimated at between 7 and 8 pounds of usable cannabis. I thought I had arranged to borrow that money, but the person who indicated they could lend it to me decided really at the last minute they couldn't. So we made an effort to withdraw the plea and go ahead and go to trial. The judge considered that proposal on our part for over a year, and then after denying my motion to withdraw my plea, he set my sentencing hearing for, I think, 72 hours later. So we didn't have much of an opportunity to bring character witnesses or expert witnesses to trial, but by the time of my sentencing hearing, which was in the fall of 2005, the judge had already received over 100 letters of support for me from a wide range of people, and we can talk about that later. And then on the day of the sentencing hearing, even though we had only 3 days to prepare, 60 people showed up in court to support me. And the judge thankfully allowed us to enter all of the medical marijuana evidence in the sentencing hearing. He indicated he had read all of the letters and they were part of my record. And he also stated that had the Raich v. Ashcroft, which later became Raich v. Gonzalez case, that was had at the time recently been decided at the Supreme Court level, had that case gone differently, he stated that he would have been in a position to be able to release me and would have been happy to do that. But basically, he said, as a judge, his hands were tied. So with all of that build-up, the judge, after a short time of deliberation, came back into the courtroom and sentenced me to 4 years probation, which again was most appreciated when he could have given me anywhere from 5 to 40 years in prison. He also could have imposed upwards of a $2 million fine. He chose not to fine me at all. The feds initially indicated they were dissatisfied with that verdict and moved to appeal the criminal verdict, but evidently that appeal went nowhere. Unfortunately, they have continued to maintain a civil asset forfeiture effort to confiscate my 187-acre farm for 7 pounds of cannabis. So we still face the potential that I'll lose my home of 4 decades. And that really leads us up to the April 25th Save Bernie's Farm benefit. A number of prominent Nashville musicians and medical people and others have worked to set up this benefit. We have 3 stellar groups participating, or individual musicians participating. We expect others to join those musicians on stage, and I'm quite excited by the people who might join the folks we're already very pleased with. So the benefit, we think, will do 2 things. We hope will raise some money that will allow me to offer the feds a monetary settlement so that they can drop, or they will drop, the civil asset forfeiture case. More importantly, the benefit is a consciousness-raising event, and everything around that, including this interview, we think, helps elevate the dialogue around medical marijuana here in the Mid-South. Just in the last 3 weeks, I've been the lead story on our local NBC affiliate's Evening News. And last Friday, Robert Kohler with the Chicago Tribune Media Services Syndicate wrote his nationally syndicated column on my case. That column was printed in the Nashville paper last Friday, and since then we have had 3 oncologists approach me saying they are willing to go on the record and to be interviewed by the media, indicating that they routinely discuss cannabis use with their new cancer patients as a way to control nausea associated with chemotherapy and radiation therapy. So regardless of how much money we raise at the benefit, raising consciousness and raising support for medical marijuana, to me, is really our primary goal with all of this.
And Bernie, tell us a little bit about the farm itself and your history with it.
I would encourage your listeners to visit the website SaveBerniesFarm.com, and they can actually do a virtual tour of the farm. It's where my heart lives. I was so lucky as a 19-year-old to become part of this farm, initially purchasing it with several of my college professors at Vanderbilt University, where I did my undergraduate work. And then over the years, I was able to buy out my other partners and also add another 40 acres to the farm. So it's around 187 acres. It has 14 ridges and 13 valleys on the farm. It's gently rolling Middle Tennessee land. About 1/3 of it is pasture, 2/3 of it is upland hardwood forest. I have 8 separate creeks, all of which start from springs on my farm. Literally, when I turn my lights off in my little farmhouse, I see no one else's lights. And as private and as spacious and as bucolic as it is, I'm still less than an hour from Nashville. So it really has the best of both worlds. Another unique feature of the farm is that I have greater than a 1 mile border with the Natchez Trace Parkway, so which is a national park highway system that runs from Nashville to Natchez, Mississippi. So the north and west borders of my farm are essentially a national park highway, which I think adds a great deal to the farm. And historically, the Natchez Trace was called the Path of Peace by Indian tribes who used it as a major trading route. And so I've always been thankful to be living near an ancient Indian trail that was called the Path of Peace. It's an absolutely beautiful place. It's a wonderful community. Lots of hardworking farmers and loggers and just down-to-earth people are my neighbors. And I'm so thankful that 29 of those neighbors took the effort to write the judge and appeal to him for leniency in my case.
Now, Bernie, let's talk about this benefit concert tomorrow night. I know there's a limited seating there, but there are still tickets available, and folks can find out more at SaveBerniesFarm.com. But, Bernie, tell us what will be happening there tomorrow night.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that I am honored that Alan St. Pierre, the executive director of NORML, has agreed to come to Nashville to MC the benefit. I really appreciate Alan doing that. We have several stellar musicians. We have one of the most entertaining blues, Cajun, Zydeco groups called Delicious Blues Stew performing, who will give us just a wonderful set of sort of Mardi Gras and Louisiana-tinged blues. We are very appreciative that Suzanne Firing and her jazz trio will participate to give us a jazz portion of the evening. And then we have Jonelle Mosser, who is probably one of the most favorite soul singers in Nashville, an extremely accomplished artist and songwriter, and she's going to be accompanied, and her band will be accompanied by Mike Henderson, who is one of the most sought-after studio guitarists in the city. So the people who have agreed to perform with us have recorded with B.B. King, Eric Clapton, Emmylou Harris, Bonnie Raitt, John Prine. I mean, the list goes on. And they are very, very popular local musicians with really a national and in some cases international following. And they, again, have volunteered their time for the evening. In addition to Alan emceeing and our musicians, we also expect to hear from our state legislators who are sponsoring the current effort in our legislature to reestablish our state's medical marijuana program, which existed from 83 until 92, and we're long overdue to reestablish it. We're also expecting that some of the 100 people who wrote letters of support will also speak, and it looks like I'll have my closest neighbor speak. We'll have someone I've done a lot of work in the fair elections movement speak, likely to have one of the nurses I worked with speak, and I'm really tickled that the young woman who wrote a letter of support as a 14-year-old to the court has agreed to speak. She's the grand old age of 16 now, but I'm really honored and humbled that she and the others have agreed to stand up and speak. We also should be able to, or not should be, we are planning to provide complimentary tickets to the benefit to local hospice patients and their caregivers to get them there. And you're right, we do have limited seating. It's a very historic theater in Nashville. The general admission tickets are $20, but we have two premium levels of tickets, $45 and $100. And for the $100 level, we'll have a free benefit meet and greet session with our speakers and performers. And we've actually got some limited edition T-shirts being produced that will be available. So the artwork for the benefit is visible on my website, again, www.saveberniesfarm.com. We've had a local graphic artist donate her time. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that one of our local radio stations has agreed to broadcast the entire benefit both on the air and on the Internet. And so those of your listeners who live around the country who want to hear some Music City jazz, blues, and soul and some good medical marijuana mobilization talks can tune in April 25th from 7 to 10 p.m. Central Time to www.radiofreenashville.org, and they'll be able to hear the benefit in its entirety.
Well, Bernie, this has been a great conversation today. I really do appreciate you joining us to share your story here today.
Thank you, Chris, so much for this time and for the chance to speak to your audience. And if any of your audience is in Middle Tennessee on May 19th, they're invited to come to my coming home party at the farm. So my personal email address is available on my website, and have people email me and I'll send them directions.
Bernie Ellis is fighting to save his farm in Tennessee from a federal civil action seeking to forfeit the property because of marijuana cultivation. You can find out more about the live benefit tomorrow night in Nashville and how you can help Bernie at SaveBerniesFarm.com. Listening to NORML's Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Make sure you visit our website at NORMLAudiostash.com. That's NORMLAudiostash.com for more information about every day's show. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Thanks for listening today. See you at 4:20 tomorrow.